Good morning. Okay.
Good morning, Boker Tov.
We're going to start today on Nun Test, right? Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Aimer. Yeah. It's on 59a. We think Hashem that you're able to learn Torah every day. It's supposed to be learning. We should have the basic English. Learning, Lil Nishmas, and we're playing with everyone that needs. And for Eretz Yisrael and the hostages. Okay. It starts off like this. We're learning about the 7 Noachide laws. And one of them was Aver Menachai. You can't eat a limb off an animal while the animal is still alive. You don't use, they didn't have refrigeration, so they would just cut a limb off and that would be fresh. And they would leave the rest of the animal alive and they would cut the other limbs off later.
Oh, I want a turkey leg.
Right. So that wasn't allowed. What about the blood? To drink the blood while the animal's still alive? Just syringe, right? Take out some blood. So is that a prohibition? You see, Jewish people aren't allowed to eat blood. Non-Jews are allowed to eat blood, but are they allowed to eat the blood from a living animal? So Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel says no. Dam Menachai is considered one of the Noachide laws. Tana Rabbana was taught in the Braisach. Basar benafshei dam leisechelu. It says, but you can't eat flesh. You eat the flesh with the soul. It's blood. Don't eat. Now, Zo Ever Menachai. When it says the flesh, that's referring to flesh with its soul. It means while the soul is still in it. It means while the flesh is alive, you can't eat it. So that's the Ever Menachai. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel says also the blood of the living animal is also prohibited to the Noachides. So my time, Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, what's the explanation? Why does he say this? So Kari Bey, he learns from the pasuk, Basar benafshei leiseichel, dami benafshei leiseichel. If you notice, there's an extra word in there. It says, however, of flesh with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat. Now, its blood, the way Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel learns it is like this. Its flesh with its soul, or its blood with its soul, you shall not eat. That means with its soul means while it's alive. Right, while its soul is still in it. You can't eat the flesh while the animal's still alive. You can't eat its blood while the animal's alive. So we put both back into benafshay. Basar benafshay and dame benafshay. The blood, the flesh while it's alive and the blood while it's alive, you can't eat.
Do those both mean the same thing?
No, one is eating flesh and one is drinking blood. Both of those you can't do while the animal's alive. Okay. Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan do with that extra word? They say that there's no prohibition of blood from a living animal. They says they're coming to tell you that if you tear a limb off a creeping creature, one of these creepers or whatever they are, the sherets. So that's not considered Aver Menachai. Aver Menachai is only a different type of animal, only the larger animals, not these struts.
Vietnam and places like that where they literally take live animals,
right?
Rip them apart or company.
That would be Aver Menachai, yeah.
But some of them are struts.
Could be. So then shrutzim would not be a problem. Yeah.
What's a lobster?
I don't know. There's a lobster sheretz. I don't know if it's specifically those 8 shrutzim or if it's. I'm not sure. I don't know
because lobsters they take alive,
right,
and then they put in hot water and then they take it right out. But is that killing it?
But that's not the worst. That's not the worst case.
Oh, I know. That's it's just.
They said in China they'll eat anything that has legs or wings.
And that moves.
Except unless it's a table, and wings unless it's an airplane. Otherwise they'll eat it.
So this means that as long as the soul is not within the blood, they could flesh with the blood.
They can eat flesh and blood. Yeah, they don't have to salt their meat. Yeah, they just can't eat it while it's alive.
And even drink the blood, they could do it as long as the soul is not.
Yeah, they can drink blood. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Hahula Mishushatz. Okay. Similar to what Rabbi Hanina taught us. This is Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. In the Mishnah we had in the first brayso that we quoted, we had him as Rabbi Hanina ben Gamla. But anyway, now it's being quoted as Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. He holds similar to this. We have to skip half of the parentheses or most of the parentheses, and we say Zedam and Achai. That's the gross version. This is referring to blood from a living animal. So there's another source for this. And the other source is further on in the Torah, when the Torah is telling us about Avram and Achai, it then says, be careful not to eat blood. And because the blood is in the soul, because the soul is in the blood. And the way he's learning it is that this is referring to the blood from a living animal is also prohibited. So he has two sources for this. For Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan do with that source? It's coming to tell us what type of blood does the Torah prohibit when a person is not allowed to drink blood. So it says, well, besides for the blood that comes out when the person slaughters it, but also blood that comes out, how do they call damakaza? The blood of bloodletting. That bloodletting is also considered blood that you're not allowed to, that type of blood is also considered, even if the person doesn't die from that blood, not the person, the animal doesn't die from that blood, he's still not allowed to drink that blood. Like it's still considered blood. Now, now the Gemara has a very general question. If I have the laws, the Noachide laws already said very early on in the Torah, in the section either of where speaking to Adam Rishon, or the section after the flood where Hashem is speaking to Noach, why do we need to later on say in the Torah the same laws? So the Gemara says, like here, we just had the blood. Can't have blood from a living animal. That we said as Hashem speaking to Noach. And then we have later on in Devarim, we have another pasuk, don't eat the blood, and it's talking about blood from a living animal. Why does it have to repeat it twice in the Torah? The Jewish people are the same as, we didn't go out of being B'nai Noach to become more lenient. So we should have the same laws that were given before. We only have additional laws. We have 7 plus 613, or maybe not. Maybe the 7 are included in the 6. So 7 and 606, right? You have 606 laws, extra laws. That's something else. So why does it have to repeat it again if we already have the original laws? So with the Gemara answers, could Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Dam Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina is an Amira, is a student of Rabbi Yochanan. Kol mitzvah shnemra levnei Noach nishus b'sinai lezevel nemra. This is very interesting. Any mitzvahs b'nei Noach that were later repeated means that it applies both to Jews and to non-Jews. Levnei Noach v'lei nishus b'sinai. If the law was said only before the giving of the Torah but was not repeated, so then this is very counterintuitive. The Yisrael Nemra v'lei levnei Noach was only said for the Jews but not for the Bnei Noach. It was said for the Bnei Noach. It's not repeated. We say instead of saying for the Bnei Noach and not for the Jews, we say it's only for the Jews and not for the Bnei Noach. Exactly the opposite of the way we would have understood this. And this would only work. This would only apply to the Gid HaNasha, which was said beforehand and not repeated later in the Torah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who his opinion in Masechta Chulin was that when it was said originally, it was said back then that they already back in the days of the sons of Yaakov that they weren't allowed to eat Gid HaNasha, as opposed to the other opinion that says that it was only later. What's going on?
In South Korea, a popular dish called sanaki. It's small octopus, octopi, whatever. But they're still moving. So they eat that still. That's nowadays it's controversial. You know what I mean? It sounds like that's a
Dr. Stein is giving some recipes for Abram and Achai with octopi. It's Sanaki or something in South Korea.
Anything that comes from Korea.
Okay. Amar Mar, we learned before in the Brisa from Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. It's not a Brisa then; it's a statement of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. It says, "We said Kol mitzvah shneimar lebnei Noach v'nishel b'sinal zel zenemer." Any mitzvah that was said twice, once to the sons of Noach, the Noachites, and once again after the giving of the Torah. That means that it's meant for both Jews and non-Jews. Adarabba, Gemara asks, on the contrary, midanishnas b'sinai liyisrael nemar b'lei lebnei Noach. On the contrary, if it's repeated, then probably what it's repeated for is to say that it only applies to the Jews, and not to the Bnei Noach. The Gemara says, "Midi isni avedis kechavim b'Sinai, v'ashkechan the anash avdi kechavim ilavei shma minal zel zenemra." It's impossible because we have the laws of avedis kechavim that are said not to worship idols are said earlier, and then they're repeated again. And we know for a fact that the non-Jews are still obligated not to worship idols. And that fact, how do we know that? Because it says that the reason why Hashem is chasing out the nations from Israel is because of these following sins, which include idolatry. And that's why they're chased out, which means that they're being punished for idolatry. If they're being punished, that means that it was a prohibition. That means that they're still prohibited. So yes, even though it's repeated, we see clearly from Avodah Zarah that even though it's repeated, it still applies to the Bnei Noach. But Bnei Noach, Sinai, let's say it was only said first, but not repeated in Sinai. The Yisrael never Bnei Noach. Then we said this is counterintuitive. It only applies to the Jews. It says Adarabba. On the contrary, logic would tell us the other way. The fact that it wasn't repeated would tell me that it only applies to the Bnei Noach and not to the Jews. That's why we didn't repeat it, because it's not relevant. And now you're telling me exactly the opposite, that it's only for the Jews and not for the Bnei Noach. The Gemara says that's impossible because leka midam del Yisrael shar le'eved from Masr. The word midam is a it means anything or nothing. That's what the word midam. But you don't find that in Gemara. Usually the Gemara uses the word midi, leka midi. Midi means anything, and the midam you find in Targum. It's very common in the Igeris scripture again. It seems like it's like a later word. Actually, not. Targum would be an earlier word. But anyway, whatever. I'm not studying the different dialects. But there is nothing that for the Jewish people is permissible, and for the nations, it's prohibited. Why? Because when we received the Torah, we increased the amount of laws that we have. We didn't subtract. So if we had the laws beforehand, we were Bnei Noach, and it doesn't get repeated. So why doesn't it get repeated? It must mean, if it would get repeated, then it would apply to everyone, right? So if it doesn't get repeated, it must mean that someone doesn't have to keep this. And it can't be us because we don't subtract laws. We only add laws. So it must be that we're subtracting it from which is very interesting. V'loi says we don't have any laws that are permissible to the Jews and to the nations. It's prohibited. When someone goes to battle and he finds a beautiful woman, he's allowed to take her, and that's only permissible to the Jews. Not to a non-Jew that goes to battle. He's not allowed to take someone else's wife that he finds in battle. She's a married woman, but a Jew is allowed to. That's because it's talking about wars that are taking place in the land of Israel, and they don't own the land. They shouldn't be conquering it. So that's why they don't have those laws. Jewish people are going to battle because they're supposed to get the land. So it's the prerequisite for the law. It's not the law that's itself. What about stealing less than a shava pruta? We said that by a non-Jew, stealing less than a shava pruta is prohibited, and by a Jew, there's no punishment for less than a shava pruta. It says, no, that's not because there's less laws. That's because they never forgive. And that's why it's prohibited. And the Jew forgives. It's not because the law is not there, it's because the scenario isn't there. Okay. Any mitzvah that was said to the Bnei Noach and then it was repeated in Sinai was said for both, right? What about Mila? Bris Mila, circumcision. It was said for the children of Avram, Batas Brisi Tishmar. It says to Avram, and you will keep my covenant, circumcise all of your household. The Benishus Besinai, and it was repeated again in Parsha Shmini. It says Bayem Shmini Yimal. It says on the 8th day, you'll circumcise. Now, who has to circumcise? The Yisrael Nemar of Leil Noach. It's only for Jews. It contradicts the rule that we just gave. Anything that was repeated should apply to both. The Gemara answers, I'm sorry. 1 second. That repetition is not because it's repeated, it's because it needs to teach me some details that weren't in the original. And the detail is that you do a bris even on Shabbos, even though it's a violation of Shabbos, but the bris pushes off Shabbos. It has to tell me that detail, that's why it repeats it. By Yom, it says on the day, Vafilu b'Shabbos, even if it's on Shabbos. Very period, V'ribishnem levei Noach, the Ksivat improve, V'nishta b'Sinai, Lechem lechem, lehem shvulachem la'alechem, L'Yisrael nem levei Noach. The mitzvah of Pru Ravu apparently only applies to the Jews. Be fruitful and multiply. Tosfos asks, how do we know this?
Just look at all the kids running.
No, how do you know? I'm not talking about how do you know that it applies to the Jews.
It says here.
I'm talking about how do you know that it doesn't apply to the non-Jews. We're asking if it was said once before the Torah was given and it said it after the Torah was given. How was it said after? Because after the giving of the Torah, it says return to your tents, because they were supposed to be separated from the wives for 3 days for the giving of the Torah. Now it says return to your tents. It means that they were commanded to be fruitful and multiply, procreate. Well, you see, it's repeated. And it doesn't apply to the non-Jews. It's interesting. Tosfos has a very interesting comment. He says that maybe the fact that it wasn't listed in the Sheva Mitzvah Bnei Noach is because it's a positive command. And we don't have positive commands in the Sheva Mitzvahs. Tosfos says no. Because it's a positive command plus a negative. It includes the negative also. The negative is not to waste the seed. And so anyone that's commanded to be fruitful and multiply also has the negative not to waste the seed. A non-Jew, if he would have been commanded on Pru Ravu, we would have had the negative that he can't waste the seed. He doesn't have any of these commands.
I always thought that this was like general command.
Yeah, so there's another mitzvah of what's the other mitzvah? L'sheves Yitzhara, that they do have, right? L'sheves Yitzhara, but not the mitzvah of Pru Ravu. I don't know what the difference is. What's l'sheves Yitzhara? To settle the land. L'sheves Yitzhara, to make civilization.
What's the second word?
Yitzhara.
Yitzhara.
Yeah.
It sounded like the Sheves Yitzhara. Very quiet Yitzhara.
Well, okay. So the Gemara says that the reason why it was repeated was not because it was just repeated. The reason why it was repeated was specific detail. It's going to teach me something important. That because there was a law that they separate from their wives for 3 days, then comes along the Torah and says, okay, the 3 days are up. But even though the 3 days are up, naturally you would be allowed to go back, but that's not true. You have to actually have a special law that says that you go back. That you have a special statement. It doesn't naturally, anything that was given a rule with a time, you need another ruling to annul that. It doesn't just, when the time's up, automatically go back. Now the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, that you're going to find the detail and tell me that the reason why it's repeated, it's not because it wants to repeat it, but it's repeating it for some detail. So then, maybe all the 7 Noachide laws that apply to the Jews and apply to the Noachides, maybe all of them are repeated only for a specific reason, and then they won't apply to the non-Jews. They'll only apply to the Jews, because anything that's not repeated only applies to the Jews, and this is not really repeated. It's just for a specific reason, just like Mila. It's like circumcision. It only applies to the Jews, even though it's repeated, because it's not. It's only for a specific reason. L'Gemara says, "Hachi kamer, azhara mihader misnei balamali." Those things that were repeated, Mila and this, they were repeated, not just that the mitzvah was repeated, but there was a detail that was repeated. The other things were repeated, even the prohibition itself were repeated. Okay, so if that's the case, then it's going to apply to both Jew and non-Jew. The prohibition itself, besides for the added detail, that's the question. Why was that repeated? That's in order to include everyone in it. And we only have, the only one exception to this is the Gid HaNasha. The Gid HaNasha, it only applies to Jews. And the reason is because it was said before and it was never repeated. Before the giving of the Torah, and it was never repeated. Gemara now says, Hani Mili, Hani Nami. Oh, ask filet mignon.
Yeah.
Hani Nami La Yisni. It says 1 second. Mila, circumcision, and Puravu also aren't repeated. Why do you just say Gidanasha? If in that category we have these others as well. So it says Hani Isni L'Shemil Sabalma, Holy Isni Klal. Those are slightly different because they were repeated, but we had a reason for it. Gidanasha wasn't even repeated at all. That's what we mean. Okay, Iba Yasema, another pshat we could say. Mila mi Karel Avram Hudakamasale Rahmana. Mila originally was only said for Avram anyway. That was never for the Bnei Noach. That was only for Avram's family. Question on this. Because if that's the way you're going to look at it, so then Al Kain La Yoichlu Bnei Yisrael Gid Hanasha. It was only for the Bnei Yisrael. Right? The comparison doesn't work. We're saying that Gid Hanasha is unique. So, well, what about Mila? It's the same thing. He said, no, Mila was only for Avram. The Gid Hanasha was for everyone. And then we took it off. I don't know the answer. Okay. So here it's only for Avram and his descendants, in a Shachin, but not for anyone else. If that's the case, Bnei Yishmael L'chayva. Avram's descendants include the children of Ishmael. Marianne says, Kibi Yitzchak Yikar L'chazar. No, it doesn't. Yitzchak is the descendants of Avram, no one else. Bnei Esav L'chayva. Well, Yitzchak has a son, Esav. Esav's descendants, all the Christians, should be chayav to be circumcised. It says, Yitzchak v'lei kol Yitzchak. In Yitzchak, but not all of Yitzchak. It's only Yaakov, not Esav. Christian.
From Esav.
Assume so. We assume Edom is like Rome and Edom, the church.
Yeah.
Okay, Maskefla, it's assumption. Maskefla Rav Aishia. Rav Aishia has a strong question. Elamiyata, if that's the case. If it's only Yitzchak, then Avram had other sons. Rashi learns this in an interesting way. Avram had other sons. And his other sons were from Keturah. What's going to come out is that Avram never gave a bris to the children of Keturah because it's only, they were born later. It wasn't in the household back then. It was only his family. And once Yitzchak was born, it was only Yitzchak, right? So the sons of Keturah would not have a circumcision. It turns out that Avram didn't circumcise them.
Did the children of Ishmael have a birth?
Ishmael for himself did, but that was before Yitzchak was born. We have a special verse that includes the children of Keturah, that they also were circumcised. Okay. It was just the Gemara here had a surprise that Avram would have members of his household that weren't circumcised.
Just remind me of the halacha. If a person was never circumcised, the mitzvah goes on the father. If the father never did, the person himself has the obligation.
Right.
Does the mother ever have the obligation? Or she never
I think
has
it says no. That's a Gemara Kedusha.
So even though Tzipora did it to Moshe's son, we don't learn anything from it. I was trying to give a plug to Torah because she was the converted
Right.
what's her name?
Hagar.
Hagar. So
Right.
I was saying, don't worry.
Rav Yehuda Rav Yehuda says the name of Rav. Adam Rishon Leyot Eloi Basar. By the way, I think the Rambam writes that Bnei Keturah are obligated to circumcise. He writes that. Rav Yehuda Rav Adam Rishon Leyot Eloi Basar Lachila. Diksiv Lachem Yalach Lachol Chayas Arts Lachol Chayas Arts Lachem. Okay, it says like this: that Rabbi Yehuda says name of Rab, that Adam Rishon had to be a vegetarian. He was not allowed to eat meat. It says for you to eat, and for the animals will be the grass of the field. You're only supposed to eat vegetation. Now it says for you to eat, and for the animals of the land, they're going to eat the grass, but you can't eat the animals of the land. That's what we learn. That's what by Adam originally they had to be vegetarian. Shabbat b'nei Noach, when the children of b'nei Noach came, that means after the flood. Hitalem, they made it permissible for them to eat meat. Shenemar ki yerek esav nasati lachem eskol, like the vegetables and the grass, like the green grass, I have given to you everything, which means that now you're allowed to eat animals as well. If that's the case, maybe you can eat Ever Menachai. The pasuk continues, it says, that you can't eat the flesh with its soul. Maybe that applies even to the shratzim. It says ach, which means however, and that's an exclusion. It means you're allowed to eat, the non-Jews are allowed to eat shratzim, these creeping creatures, even while the animal is still alive. My Talmud, how do you get shratzim out of the word ach, that it's excluded? I don't understand what this means, but I'll tell you what it's saying. It's saying that certain flesh, the blood is separated from the flesh. I guess it goes through arteries or something.
No,
Cold-blooded animal.
The same system, it's just cold blood.
So
They don't have
No,
blood.
so by the
That's not
shratzim, apparently the blood and the flesh are more together than it is. It becomes one thing and not the separate, like the blood flows through arteries or something. Blood and flesh is one mixture. That's what it seems. So what's prohibited is only animals that have blood separated from the flesh. Shratzim don't have blood separated from the flesh. Blood and flesh are together. I have no clue. I don't know.
They still have some sort of small heart, maybe two-chamber heart or one-chamber.
This just calls for a dissection.
I don't know. Then maybe the Koran would explain it. Maybe the art school explains it. I don't know.
Let me ask my girlfriend. Siri,
Switch over.
what makes a cold-blooded animal cold-blooded?
No, that is not one.
No, it has to do. It's called cold-blooded only because of the thermoregulatory. Nothing to
Yeah.
do with the
Siri says it has not. It's not. Doesn't have to do with cold-blooded. Cold-blooded is something else. Okay. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. What did it mean? It's Hashem told Avram that you'll rule over the fish of the sea. That means that he's going to be able to eat the fish. Oh, Avram had to be not only a vegetarian, he had to be a vegan. Couldn't have fish. My love la'achila. Guess not. That means that he could eat it. It says he should rule over the fish. It says laila malacha. No, it means you'll make the fish do work. How do you make fish do work? It says kedarachva, like we had in Baba Kama, the boy Rachba had a question. Let's say someone puts a yoke on a goat, and he puts it on the fish, and it's along the side of the river bank, right? And it does plowing, and you're not allowed to put a yoke of two animals together. The question was, is this considered two animals together? Obviously, this was a possibility. Tashma, it says you'll rule over the birds of the heaven. My love, lachila. It means you'll be able to eat the birds. It says laila malacha. No, this means that you'll get the birds to do work. Vaifus b'nei malachanin, or you can get the birds to do work. In Yakadabai Rabba Baravuna. Rabba Baravuna had a question. Dash ba'abazim atana goyim. The Rabbi Yisrael Rabbi Yehuda Mai says you're not allowed to muzzle an animal when it's threshing the grain, when it's stomping on it. So the Gemara says that it has to do with when it's stepping on it with its hands and feet. Because animals have hands and feet that they walk on, right? The front 4 legs and the hind leg. So, but the Gemara says, let's say it only has 2 legs because it's a bird. Is the same? Are you allowed to muzzle? Did you see that that WhatsApp is the chickens have a flu going around? They said we have a simple solution. They showed a picture of them, the mask. Just put masks on them. So anyway, are you allowed to muzzle the bird if it's doing threshing? So you see, obviously they can do work. Okay, Tashima. And all the animals that creep on the any living thing that creeps on the earth. You see, that means you're allowed to do you can eat it. It says no. That's coming to tell us about the snake. Tanya Reb Shimon ben Menashe Aimer. Shimon ben Menashe says, Chaval al Shamish Gadol, Shaved Menailam. We lost a good worker, lost a good servant. Shel Malay Niskal al Nachash. If not for the Nachash getting cursed, then Kolach Rachim Yisrael Mizam Leshnei Nachashim Tevim, we would have 2 good snakes. Echad Meshagri Litzaf Mechad Meshagri Lidarim. One of them we'd send on a mission to the north. One we'd send on a mission to the south. Labilay Sandal Bainam Tevim Avan Tevish Magalas. We'd send them on a mission to bring back precious sandal bailam. I don't know what that is. Some type of stones, and precious stones and pearls. We would actually tie a strap under its tail, and would get it to bring dirt. To hop over and bring the dirt from one place to another and to fix the field. Okay, so you see that the snake would be able to do work. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. Here, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema Aimer. Yehuda ben Tema would say, Adam Rishon Meisvei Gan Eden. Adam Rishon was sitting in Gan Eden. The angels were barbecuing meat. They were straining the wine. Hitzitz by Nachash. The Nachash looks at him. Rabbi Koili sees that great honor of Iniskanibai, and he's jealous. He wants to get rid of him, so he feeds him the poisonous, the fruit. He should die. That wasn't poison; it was prohibition. Poison because of a prohibition. That says, you see, he was eating meat. Adam Risha, how was he eating meat? I thought he wasn't allowed to eat meat. It says, that was meat that came from heaven. He didn't kill any animals for that. That was created in a lab. Artificial meat came from the heaven. Is there such a thing that meat can come from heaven? It says in Reb Shimon ben Chalafta. We even have a story with Reb Shimon ben Chalafta. Shimon ben Chalafta is a student of Rebbe. He's later than Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta was older than Rebbe. It's like a father. It's not. It seems like it's not his brother. It's not Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta's brother. That's what it seems. He was one time going on the road. They were. What does name mean? They were roaring. Yeah, Nayam. They were roaring. These lions were coming to him. They were roaring in front of him. They wanted to eat him. Amar Hakfirim Shaygam Lateref. He said, the lions are roaring for food. Nechisule Tarti Atmasa. So 2 thighs of an animal came down from heaven. They ate one and they left one. I say, he brings the leg, the thigh, to the base medrash. He has a question. David Tami Uzai David Tar. Is this kosher? Is it not kosher? You're allowed to eat this.
What's
Good
the
question. Amalei and David Tami Yared Min Hashemayim. It says if it came from heaven, it's got to be kosher, right? It came from heaven. Today they would not be so lenient. It's even if it comes from heaven, it has to. We have to know where in heaven it came from. Did it come from the Badatz, or did it come from the Lubavitch Shchita in heaven? Which part, right? Reb Zera asked Reb Bavo the following question. So let's say it would have been a donkey that came down. Would that still be kosher? It says, Amalei Yared Nala, this foolish bird. Amrele, they said, nothing impure comes from heaven, which probably means that a donkey wouldn't come down. And even if it would be tahar. Okay.
No, then the lions would eat it.
Oh, they would have eaten it.
I mean,
Why did they leave half? Why did the lions leave half? I guess they were full.
No, the world was built on kindness. Even the lions were kind.
Shimon says that the nations are also prohibited to do witchcraft. My time to Reb Shimon, where does he get this from? The Ksiv, it says in the pasuk, it says you can't let this week's parsha, you can't let a magician, a sorcerer, right, live, which means there's a death penalty. It says anyone that lays with an animal is put to death in the same verse. Anyone that has the prohibition of living with an animal also has the prohibition of not to allow magic. Okay, so that's the source. Rabbi says you can't. They're also prohibited to do grafting and what was the other, and mating and crossbreeding. How does Rabbi Lezer know this? Amar Shmuel, Amar Kra. It says it says you have to keep my statutes. Now, what are the statutes? It says, I should read it like this. My statutes, you should guard, which means my statutes that you already had before, you should guard them now. That means that what? It means that they were before. What are they? And the pasuk continues. It says, it says that you can't crossbreed and you can't plant your field. Just like the animal, it's with crossbreeding. Also, the field is with grafting. It has to be an actual act over here. Okay. Just like the animal, you're not allowed to crossbreed. Doesn't matter where it is. So too, the kalayim doesn't matter where it is. It's not only in Israel. It applies to the rest of the world. Elamiyata, that's the way you're going to learn this. You should guard my statutes. And also my laws. Maybe we'll say the same thing for the rest of the Torah. Guard my statutes that I've given you before. That means the whole Torah was before. It says over there. First, the word is you should guard, and then it says you should guard my statutes. Over here it says my statutes you should guard. First there were statutes, and then you should guard them. It means that these laws were already before. Okay, that's Rebbe Lezer's source for those two types of kalayim. I'm Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says, Shua ben Karcha added in that they can't curse, they're not allowed to curse Hashem. What was his words? Rabbi Yosi, that's Parshas Kishav. Rebbe Lezer's for kalayim. So we go back to earlier. Rabbi Yesh, Rabbi Chananya, Rabbi Chidkia, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yosi, Kishav. Where in this was Rabbi Shua ben Karcha? Okay. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, "Enachayvat yivarach Shem ben arba isis lafuki ben shtei isis." Rav Acha bar Yaakov comes in, he teaches us halacha. He says that when would the prohibition be? Only if you use the name of Hashem that has 4 letters, which is the Shema Mefurish, right? Not the Shema, not the Shema Mefurish is the name that has the 42 letters or something like that. This is even Yud Kei Vav Kei, the like that it doesn't. But if it has 2 letters, that doesn't work. It says Pshita, that's obvious. Yaki Yosis Yosi Tanan. In the Mishnah it says Yaki Yosis Yosi. It says that Yosi curses Yosi, which was a nickname for the 4 letters of Hashem's name. Could have thought that was just an example. Mashmalan is coming to tell me that it's very specific, that the 4-letter name of Hashem, the same rule applies. Ikad Amri, that those that said this differently, they said, Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Shema Mina, Shem ben Arba'is Tami Shemel. It could have went the other way. It could have thought that really a person only chayiv says the 42-letter name of Hashem. Kamash Malan, you see, the first way was, I could have thought that it's only for the 4-letter, but not the 2-letter. Now I could have thought that it's much more than that. It's only the 42-letter, but not the 4-letter. So he comes to tell me that it's the 4-letter. Pshita, Yaki Yes Yes Tanan. It says clearly that it's the 4-letter. It says Mao the Tema Ad Ika Shem Rabba Umel Sabal Mudanaka. Could have thought that really it means the much larger name of Hashem. But it was just choosing an example, and it used this example, but it wasn't accurate. Mashmalan, that it's being accurate, that it doesn't need to be the 42-letter name of Hashem. It could also be the 4-letter name of Hashem. Nigmar Adin. After, that's where it was. It wasn't in the. This wasn't. We're finished with the Shabbat Mitzvah B'nai Nayach, and now we went back to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Eimer, that every day the witnesses would say, this is not the Shabbat Mitzvah B'nai Nayach, this every day the witnesses would use a nickname, and only at the end they would pronounce actually what they heard. I guess I should leave it here. We're holding by Nigma Din. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day. Both of.
Have a good day.